me at those churches. Um, I'm happy to be here and take your guys' blessing. So I was asked today to kind of put on a talk for the relentless, or joy in general, joy of the resurrection. Um, so I thought it would be wise, because I'm sure you've guys heard of multiple talks on joy. You know, probably the more traditional talk on joy, it being enduring, right? When we think of joy, when we compare it to happiness, joy is what's everlasting, correct? Yeah, no, maybe. I'm a talker, so I'm gonna ask a lot of questions. So I'm gonna need some input, guys. Yes, no? Okay. So today I wanted us to kind of reflect a little bit more in depth about joy, but I also wanted it to be a joyful experience, that no pun intended. So it's gonna be a lot of stories today, and it's intentional. I want us to kind of just have an easier day today, less content, more fun stories you guys can take home and think about and meditate. Okay? For those who just walked in, my name is Abram. It's a pleasure to meet you guys. Today's talk is, as you can see, it's going to be on joy, the joy of the resurrection. Today's talk, the relentless heart of joy. Okay? So we'll start out with a quick joke, just to kind of lighten this up. So, who's this guy on the screen? Jonah, right? Jonah, correct. So there happened to be a bishop who was visiting a parish at a local parish, and there was a youth that came up to him and had a question. Happened to be around Jonah's feast, and he asked the question. He said, so is Jonah a holy man? Bishop says, of course. And he says, well, is Jonah going to heaven? Of course he is. Of course he is. He's like, well, how do you know? So the bishop looks at him. He says, you know what? I'm going to go up to heaven. When I go up to heaven, I pass away. I'll ask him if he's a holy man, and we'll make sure that he made it to heaven. And I'll let you know. He says, okay. All right. But what if he's not in heaven? Says the youth. He says, okay, then you ask him. I don't know if you guys got that, but So Jonah. Why am I bringing up Jonah? We know that when we start the fast, the Holy 50, right? The Great Fast. We always have a quick little small 3-day fast prior. Jonah's fast, right? Why do we do that? Who can remember? No one. It's kind of an icon of the journey that Christ takes through his death and his resurrection. But we also forget that Jonah experiences an icon of that resurrection. He comes into the belly of the whale. In fact, the Hebrew word is actually giant fish, so you might see iconographers drawing like a big fish, not necessarily an actual whale. He stays there for 3 nights, and then he comes out of the whale, fully himself. No part of him is destroyed. No part of him is decayed. No part of him is missing. He's fully Jonah, right? Interesting, right? Just like Christ. Sounds familiar, right? But icons are just icons, correct? Jonah is not perfect. We can say he had a few mistakes, but there's one that's relevant for today. He was missing something. He was huffing and puffing and grumpy and didn't want to go and, save the Ninevites, right? And preach to them and tell them about, their salvation. Hey guys, you need to repent. He didn't want to do that because he knew God's merciful hand, his merciful love. But what brought him to that point of him going through this, I guess you can say almost a metania or metanoia, right? This change of heart for him to listen to God when God said, hey, go talk to the Ninevites. It didn't seem like it was 100% of a conversion there. What was it that he was missing? And you guys can take a huge guess, and it's literally the topic of today. So what was he missing? It was joy, right? The joy of what? His own resurrection. Christ's mercy, Christ's love, right? Okay. Let's move on forward. All right. So joy, in essence, is a fruit of the Spirit. You guys remember this? We learned this in Sunday school. Love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. I don't remember that song. Galatians 5:22. You guys remember that? Yeah? So it happens to be a fruit of the Spirit. And something that's beautiful about the characteristics of each of the fruit of the spirits is that they tend to be sticky. And I'll refer to them not just as fruit of the spirits, but I'll refer to them as virtue. These virtues are sticky. What do I mean by that? They all impact each other in some way, shape, or form. So when I talk about one, let's say we talk about love, it's hard not to talk about humility. You know, it's hard not to talk about any other of the virtues. You can list them, right? Same with joy specifically, right? In fact, it happens to be listed in a ranking, as you see Paul. Paul says love, joy, peace in Galatians, right? He continues to list them. And I don't think it's unintentional that he ranks joy as number 2, right? Love is that number 1, right? That the pinnacle of all virtue. And then joy comes right after it. Why did he choose joy right after that? Interesting. Okay. So we see this depiction that both Christ and St. Paul uses is a tree. And this tree of fruits, and the fruits being the virtue or the fruits of the Spirit. Okay? And what's beautiful about this depiction is we know that when the tree itself is grown and watered and nourished, these fruits grow. They all grow simultaneously. Obviously, some fruits grow a little quicker than others. Some have a propensity to be sweeter than others, whatever is the case may be. But at the end of the day, they're all kind of growing in unison. So one impacts the other. And the one, and I don't want to say it's faulty, but no example that any of us can give can really fully grab the essence of anything that has to do with the spiritual life. There's one attribute that I want us to notice, is that when one of these fruits are affected, so the opposite, we're talking about how they all grow in unison, if I were to destroy one of the fruits, you'll see an impact not just on the fruit, but on also the rest of the tree, meaning also the rest of the fruits. Weird, right? Trees usually don't do that. But the tree of our spirits, this is the way it works. This kind of makes sense? Everybody follow me a little bit? I'll give you a small example. Let's say the virtue of honesty. If I were to grow in honesty, I'm very honest, right? And I know that in essence, truth and love come hand in hand. Yes? So in some ways, I'm growing in love, right? The opposite could be said. So let's say I start lying to you guys. Do I really love you guys if I'm lying to you guys? In real essence, right? Probably not, right? Probably love whatever it is that I'm trying to hide. So they have an effect on each other, okay? All right. All right. So, this joy that we carry happens to be one of the most distinguishing characteristics that makes us Christian. And I say this because, of course, we see in many essence love, but people don't really fully understand what love is, right? They have many definitions of love. But what's weird about our love is that it's joyful. It's joyful. And what do we say joy is, in essence? What's the quality that it has that's different than happiness that we said earlier? Is that it endures, right? It endures the good and the bad, right? And the suffering and the pain and the harshness, right? Okay. So let's today look at joy And as this is specific attribute of joy is going to be the nourishment of the spiritual life. Joy as the nourishment of spiritual life. So I'm going to ask you guys again, what did I just say? The joy is a nourishment of what? The spiritual life. Perfect. Okay. Here comes the cool stories. Okay. Most of today's talk is going to be based on what happened in 1981, where a bunch of clergy and Egyptian Coptic laity happened to be imprisoned by Anwar Sadat, President Anwar Sadat. That's the guy that's right here. Who's that? You guys hear about him before? So in 1981, unfortunately, a bunch of us Coptic people were imprisoned. They targeted a bunch of very, very holy men. Some of these names being like Amba Tadros min Port Said, right? Rabuna Lu'a Sidros, Rabuna Tadros Ya'ub Malati. These sound like familiar names, correct? Maybe Mama or Baba told you guys about them. Maybe you read something about them. So they actually happened to be imprisoned. For the longest time, especially here in Los Angeles, is the one that we had closest to our heart is Abuna Lu'a. He happened to be locally, and he happened to be imprisoned, unfortunately. So many of his kids would come up to him and ask him, how was the prison like? What happened in the prison? Tell us about the prison. And every time, you know, if you know anything about Abuna Lu'a, is escote bet, escote yala. You know, don't ask those questions. Of course, out of humility, he wouldn't want to tell about what he experienced. But he wrote it down. So we're going to talk about it today, thank God. So he had passed, unfortunately. I'm not sure if everyone knows. He happens to be in the paradise currently. So now he left a little bit of, I guess you could say, joy for us to kind of meditate on today. All right? So, joy nourishes fearlessness in the world. Joy nourishes fearlessness in the world. Okay. So who are these guys? I'm kind of talking about them a little bit. It's the goats, right? It's what we all kind of want to aspire to be, right? Buna Tadros Malati is on my right, so you guys is left. Buna Lu is on my left, your guys is right. And then right dead center, that one probably is the most familiar to you guys. Do you guys know who that is? Buna Bishoy Kama, right? That's the saint. That's the one who was recently canonized, right? Buna Bishoy Kama was, I guess you could say, not necessarily ordained by Pope Krulus, but chosen by Pope Krulus. He ended up being ordained by a different bishop. But he was instructed by Baba Krulus to say, hey, you're going to be a good priest. You got to be a priest. And he's like, wait, what? I want to be a monk. I want to be a monk. Why? I don't want to do this. What? So he's like, no, you're gonna be a priest. And he's like, okay, you know, whatever God says, kind of thing. He then kind of took under his wing Abuna Lu'a and Abuna Tadros, and you know, he grew them in the faith. And bam, he's like, all right, you guys need to be priests too. So he had kind of a little shalaba'a, him and his friends, and they just spread the gospel. They spread the gospel to the point where they changed an entire church, you know, to fully realize God's love for them. And that's part of the reason why Abuna Bishoy Kemal is a saint. And at least locally, we call Abuna Lu'a a saint as well. Obviously, he's not canonized, so please don't shoot me. All right? So what happened? All right, so how does this nourishment of fear, what are you talking about? So one night, it happened to be 3 a.m. in the morning, Abuna Lu'a had finished a lot of service. He was exhausted, he came back home, and he gets a call. And his wife, Tusoni Nadia, was like, oh, I gotta look at the phone. Takes the phone call, she listens to it. She's like, oh my gosh, it's Tusoni Mary. Who's Tusoni Mary? Tusoni Mary is Abuna Tadros' wife. Okay, Abuna Ilha, something happened with Abuna Tadros. So Abuna Lu'a is like, okay, give me the phone. Zayk, ya Mary, il hasal. Zayk Tusoni. She's freaking out. By the way, does anyone not know Arabic? If I'm speaking Arabic, I can repeat it in English. So Abu Lu'al basically says, hand me the phone so I can talk to Soni Mary, Sister Mary, so I can understand what's going on. Mary's like, of course, fanatic, crying, screaming. Abuna Tadros, they took Abuna Tadros, they took Abuna Tadros. They came in the house. Who's they? Oh, these soldiers, these secret service. They came in the house, they flipped the house upside down, and they took Abuna Tadros. They took my husband. Ilha, what do we do? So, okay, he's like, one sec to Sony. Let me go ahead and make some calls. Closes the phone, picks up the phone again. He's calling the bishop to see what's going on. Why the heck did they take, Abuna Tadros? This is weird. Calls and he says, and he gets a hold of one of the bishops, and the bishop says, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. That's shocking. Why did they take him? So then he closes the phone again. He's like, wait, I need to know more about this. I probably should have asked Mary a little bit more questions. So picks up the phone, calls Mary again. To Sonny Mary. He says, hello to Sonny. He's like, Abuna, she's trying to collect herself, and Abuna's like, Ulli, what happened? Did anything happen? Did they ask him questions? Did they ask you something? And they said, they just came in and they just barged in and they said, you got to come in. And then they put him in like a van. I'm not sure what's going on. And she's panicking. So as she's speaking, he hears, and he hears the door bust in. So someone punches in through his door. So Bunalua goes, hold on 1 second. I think they're here for me too. 1 second. She closes the phone. All right. So they go to their bedroom door. They go to open it, and they see the Secret Service there. It says, oh, Father Lu'a, okay. He says, oh, come in. Come sit down in my bedroom. Let me get you guys some food or something. Is there anything? And they're like, no, we don't want anything. Go put your clothes on. He's like, oh, okay. Give me 1 moment. Right? He goes and he changes, and he comes out. He says, all right, Father Lu'a, you're going to have to come with us. Don't worry. Don't be afraid, he says. So, don't be afraid. So, if you know anything about Abuna Lu'a, he's extremely sarcastic, and he's fearless. Like I said, joy nourishes fearlessness. There's no one that scared him on this planet other than Christ himself. That is it, right? God, the fear of God. So he looks at him after this comment of, don't be afraid. He says, who said I was afraid? You're afraid. I think you're afraid. Right? And the Secret Service looks at him and says, why? Confused. Why would I be afraid? Like, I'm here intruding on your house. How is it that I'm confused at this, right? So this kind of gives you a little bit of the essence of the fearlessness that joy can bring. Okay? All right. Here. This is the big guy, and this is the kind of the van. So what they ended up doing is they took him, they brought him down, they brought him to the van, they opened the van, they put him in. Guess who's there? Abuna Tadros. All right. Okay. Next virtue, or attribute of joy. Joy nourishes steadfastness and faith. Joy nourishes steadfastness and faith. It nourishes faith, okay? Joy helps faith, simply put. All right, so basically a bunch of clergy, they collected about 8 bishops, a bunch of priests, and a whole lot of laity, happened to be Coptic, and they brought him to a specific prison called Abu Zabel. I'm for sure I mispronounced that. Forgive me if I did. And it happened to be the worst prison that Egypt has to offer, unfortunately. Okay? They were stripped, they were searched, they were questioned, everything you can think of. Okay? And Abuna Lu'a specifically happened to be put in a cell, the cell called prison cell 15. They were all put in cells. So he tells us a little bit about this cell, okay? They open the door, they throw him in, they throw 2 other people in. The first one being Abuna Samuel, Tabit, I'm not sure. I've never met him before, but he happened to be a priest. I think he's in, I don't know if it's Australia or still in, Chicago. I think he's in Chicago. But he obviously was in Egypt at the time. And another laity. I think the layman was called Adel Bastauros. I'm giving names just in case. And these people came, and they're in the cell, and they're laying down. And now Abuna starts to look around in the cell. Remember, he's stripped, he's put in prison clothing, he's treated like a dog, he's questioned, and he's thrown in the cell. What does the cell look like? So it's about 4.5 or 4'11" by 5'9" What does that look like? It's about 5 by 5 feet, 5.5 feet, roughly. That's, I want to say like, probably I want to say like these 3 rows would be the size of 5 by 5. Right? It's like this much. And they threw 3 large men in there. Frodo was tall. 3 large men in there. No windows. No bench, no chairs, no seats, just a floor. And there's this one little pothole for them to go to the bathroom. And it was kind of separated by this little divider, which took up space already. And that was their room. The door was closed, not just by prison cells with little bars. It wasn't like that. It was an iron door, so there was no air coming in and out. There was a small little slit. This little slit happened to have just enough so you can kind of put food through, you can speak through it, but that's it. Very, very small slit through the door. And that was where most of their light source came through and the air flow that came through. The cell was uninhabitable, to say the least. All right. They had to stay in the cell within a 24-hour period, they would leave the cell for about 5 to 10 minutes each per day, at least for the first few days or so. They eventually increased it to 30 minutes. Great, right? And that was just so that way they don't, either kill each other or kill themselves in some way. Because to be in prison confinement, I mean, human rights, right? At least, wink, wink, right? Quote unquote, somehow, right? What would their meals look like? Okay, so they fed them basically really hard stale bread, of course, a few scoops of rice that they all had to share, old, hard, rock-solid feta cheese, little crumbles of that, and if I'm not mistaken, a cup of ats in a little pot. Now, this food wasn't like made by a gourmet chef. There's bugs. It smells not fresh. It's not probably edible, but they ate it because obviously they're starving. There was no place to put the food. They were given one plate that they all had to share, no utensils for a majority of the time. So they had to put the bread itself either next to the toilet or on top of their shoes. It's intense stuff, right? So what would this do? So I'm gonna take it a step further, right? Remember how I said that there's no sort of airflow. So you can imagine, I mean, who has a brother here or some sort of male figure or, right? Some sort of male in there, whether dad or whatever. We're not the most pleasant smelling creatures, unfortunately, especially when we don't shower for a week straight, right? And if they're Egyptian, oh, okay, we're sweaty people, right? We're very sweaty people, unfortunately. So imagine 7 men not showering for a week straight in the hot sun within this little heat box. It's almost as if it's an oven with an iron door, so it already retains heat as much as you can imagine. I'm sure they could barely breathe, is what he describes, to the point where the prisoners, all the laity and the clergy, sometimes they would try to stick their nose underneath the door just so they can get like a whiff of fresh air. Just something to kind of keep them going. Let's take another step further. Bugs were a huge problem, obviously because of the pothole, there's feces. Anywhere there's poo, there happens to be bugs. Mosquitoes, lots of mosquitoes, unfortunately. So they were getting bit left and right. They were just nice sausages for these for these poor men were just nice sausages for these mosquitoes, unfortunately. So they're getting bitten all over the place. And they would say, okay, you know what? We'll come once a day and we'll spray the mosquitoes to help you out. But here's how messed up they are. Is they would take the spray, they would have them all get out real quick. They would spray the entire room. They would shove them back in the room. They'd close the door. There was no air flow. No one can breathe. So not only can you not breathe, but they probably didn't kill all the mosquitoes. So it's this horrible situation, right? It's not a joyful picture, you would think, right? So what did this do to them? How did this affect their spirit? How did this affect their mood, right? This happened to be the time period that majority of them will tell you that they would never change ever in their life, that they would continuously choose to do it. Why? They said they experienced the love of Christ there. What does that mean? Have you ever done something and, we all have our parents, and let's say we did an act of something that was similar to our father or mother, and it helped us give us perspective on their life, and we're like, wow, and it made us appreciate them more. It's almost as if we feel more connected to them in some good way. We can think back. Maybe it was like, you used to see your parents give to the poor, and then, you saw a guy on the street and you gave him $1, and you're like, wait, my mom used to do that when I used to grow up, and now I feel like I'm like my mom. And there's this love that's shared. This is the same sort of feeling that Christ and his kids experience, right? So Christ is on the cross. He's experiencing pure agony. These men are in a hot room experiencing pure agony for the sake of love, right? They did nothing wrong but accept love, right? That's why they're imprisoned, unfortunately. Christ as well did nothing wrong except love. So there's this unity that they enjoyed. So they enjoyed some forms of intimacy. And what's intimacy in the spiritual life? How do, I don't want to give the word away, but how is it that God and man interact with each other and show that they love each other in some way? Very easy question, very Sunday school question. God, man. Man loves God. How does man love God? Prayer, bingo, right? So what would they do? Every morning they all decided, because they had the screen so they can kind of yell across the halls to each other. They said, we're going to do 400 matanyas and sing Kenonia-Relentless over and over and over again every morning, okay? That's just starting off the day. So you can imagine these sweaty men just matanya after matanya after Kenonia-Relentless, 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 right? Every feast, every spiritual holiday, every sort of, because obviously they were there for a while. They would bounce between different prisons eventually, but they were there for a while. So they happened to miss a lot of spiritual feasts, like St. George's Feast, and the Feast of the Cross, and the Resurrection, all that stuff, right? They missed all that stuff. So what they would do is they would, because they're very holy men, so they already memorized the Julian calendar that we follow. And they would know, okay, this is the feast of St. George, so we're going to do him Tizbahat today. So they'd be very intentional. Oh, today's the Feast of the Cross, or today's the 3 days of the Feast of the Cross. So we're going to do veneration to the cross today. So they would all kind of follow each other in prayers and sings and hymns and psalms and all that. They would also do more on top of that. They would host, you can say, a Bible session every night together. You can imagine bishops screaming to all these different rooms saying, all right, we're going to read 1 Corinthians. And they start yelling across the hall. And you can imagine how beautiful that must have been. And the prison guards are watching all this, just fully shocked. And we'll get to that later, right? And this is all aside from them, each of them doing their own spiritual canon. What do I mean by spiritual canon? They all got to holiness in some way, shape, or form, correct? And that was because of the prayer and the spiritual life that they lived with Christ before they even got to the prison cell. these men who documented their lives made it a point to state, we did not stop our spiritual canon. We felt so enamored that even though that we had all this extra stuff, all these extra matanias and all these, tizbaha, they would also sing a lot of hymns together during their free time just for funsies. And all this Bible study, that they would continue their own prayers that they would usually do at home, their own Bible readings that they would do at home, their own meditations or solitude or silence that they would do at home. And we'll get into that later as well. So there was a sense of joy throughout the entire prison, at least in this specific sect. The prisoners would see this and be like, what the heck? These people are crazy. These people are crazy. To the point where they would do these Kyrie eleisons. Remember how I was telling you? They do the matanias, 400 matanias, say Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. So God is very tender-hearted, to say the least. And as they were doing this, these men, these holy men that loved God, and God loved them, of course, things would happen, unfortunate things would happen for all these people that would happen to be punishing, you can say, these men. Things would happen. They started to make connections. These prison guards are saying, all right, every time they say son, 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 bad things happen to us. They got to stop saying son, 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 right? So they came to them, they opened the doors, and they're like, what are you guys doing? We're like, we're just praying, we're saying, Lord, have mercy. No, you guys are saying spells. You guys are saying spells, witchcraft. Every time you guys say son, 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 bad things happen to us, right? And they're like, oh, okay, you guys got to stop. We don't want to hear another son out of you, right? So of course, whatever. They would just pray in their hearts. They would try to do their matanias as silently as they could. Let's move on to and this is the prison, as you guys can see, and you can picture the cell there. Okay. Next attribute. Joy nourishes laughter and personality. So I want to break it up a little bit because I know it's getting a little heavy with all the topic and the suffering that we're talking about. So we're going to get into a little bit of jokes here. Okay, not my jokes, but these saints' jokes. All right. So specifically, Abuna Lu'a happens to be a very funny person in general, but very spiritually profound. This happens to be Abuna Lu'a, okay? This is what he looked like before he ended up passing away from cancer, unfortunately. And remember I was telling you, he's very sarcastic, he's very playful, but every time he would say something, he meant it literally. And why am I saying this? So if you happen to ever walk by him, or you said hi to him, and let's say you had a conversation with him, he'll look at you, he'll sometimes say, Yaroh Ummak. Right? What does that mean? Your mother, the heart of your mother, right? Which just means, what does this mean? This means like mama's boy or mama's girl, right? Like it's the equivalent of saying Yaroh Ummak, right? Right. So it's very funny. You can even hear him. You can kind of hear his like Yaroh Ummak, like very heavy Egyptian, right? But he meant it literally, right? Who's your mother? And to kind of give you guys the full explanation, or the translation is Ruh Ummak means the heart of your mother. Who's our mother? Ruh Ummak, who's our mother? The church, that's a good one as well. Someone specific. The Virgin Mary. Bingo, Saint Mary. Right, Saint Mary. Ruh Ummak, the heart of your mom. Right? You're a piece of Saint Mary. Like Saint Mary loves you so much, right? Ya Ruh Ummak. And he says it in a way that protects him from obviously pride, but also to kind of get you to laugh a little bit and see that he's human, right? So Ya Ruh Ummak, right? Here, sorry, my phone keeps locking on me here. Another beautiful story from Abuna Lu'a, specifically about Abuna Lu'a. Abuna Samuel, the priest that happened to be with him in the cell, writes in the beginning of this book that I'm quoting from today, one of his personal experiences that profoundly touched his life. So remember, we said joy nourishes personality and laughter. So these men are suffering. They're barely eating. They smell really bad. They haven't showered. Everything hurts. They sleep on the floor. So Abuna Samuel happened to be a very neat freak guy. So this is a very painful process for him. And he liked things very tidy. He likes to keep things organized. So as much as he could, he would, like put his shoes in a specific way. He would try to pretend like he had a dresser. It was just these kind of mind games to kind of help him to get through the suffering. And they would always get this pail of water, and they would place this pail inside the room so that way they can drink or whatever, or use it to wash their plate or whatever it is that they wanted to do with the water. And they'd get 1 bucket of water a day. That's it. For all 3 of them. So one day, Abuna felt a little spicy. And Abuna Samuel, of course, in his nature was being very neat freakish. Put the thing, Abuna Samuel is kind of not having the greatest day, of course, obviously suffering. And Abuna kind of walks up, and he wasn't wearing shoes at the time. Walks up to the bucket. He takes his foot and he just dips his toe in it. And he looks at Abuna Samuel. And he just looks at him. And Abuna Samuel looks at Abuna and he just busts out laughing, right? They're just laughing at each other at the fact that this man just soiled their entire water supply, right? But it showed that the personality of Abuna, right? Whenever we become holier, we become more like Christ, our personalities bloom. It's the common misconception that we think we're going to be overcasted by Christ, but in fact it's the opposite. Christ decides to be inside us, not outside us, right? He illuminates us in a way to kind of, and he's the one who created us, right? Just the way he made flowers, he makes them very beautiful, right? He puts life into them and they bloom. Same thing with us, right? So we see Abuna's personality in this. And we see the joy and the easygoingness and demu khafif, which means his blood is light, as we can, it's a phrase that we say in Arabic, just means he's a very kind-hearted, funny guy, all right? And this happens to be Abuna Samuel on your guys' right, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay. Or left. Sorry, left. My directions are great, as you guys can see. Next story for this, Mother Teresa. Who's heard of her? Does she sound familiar at all? No? No one's heard of Mother Teresa? Because I know we're talking about dudes a lot, so I thought it'd be fair that we got to talk about some girl saints, right? So Mother Teresa. So she happens to be very short. Let's see if you can kind of see it here. She's very short. She's a very holy, reverend woman. She started her own order through the calling of Christ, the Missionaries of Charity, they call it. And what they would do is they would basically serve the poorest of the poor. They would live with them, they would eat with them, and they would serve them hand and feet. They would start with children, and they moved on to mothers, and then they moved on to whole families. They would find dead people in the street or people who were dying. They would bring them in and just love on them as they're dying. Basically a service no one wanted to do. This was in Calcutta, India. So through this, and through her spiritual life beforehand, she was very close to God in her prayer life and her love, and her whole life was enamored and wrapped in God. So I think it's fair for us, even though she doesn't happen to be a Coptic Orthodox saint, it's fair for us to say at least that she is a very revered woman that we can revere, and in my personal opinion, I think she's a saint, regardless of whether she's Coptic or not Coptic. Okay? Just don't tell Ambassador on me, okay? I'm just joking. I'm teasing you guys. So here. There happened to be one day when she visited the Vatican. The Vatican is where the Pope, the Catholic Pope, resides. And do you guys know the guards that, kind of stand in front of the Pope and kind of protect the Vatican? Do you guys know what they are? They're called like Swiss guards. You guys seen them? They wear like funny clothes. Does this look familiar? They look like, like clowns, but whatever, right? To each his own. And they're very serious. Like, you can't get them off their game. Like, you poke at them. It's kind of like the UK, right? Like, you poke at them, they will not. Like, you cannot get them off their game, right? They're protecting the Pope, right? very strong, big men. There's like a height requirement. You have to be 5'9" and above. But usually, what they would do, especially with these men in these colorful outfits, they would get the larger men, so the 6'5", 6'9", 6'7", these huge men in these nice, beautiful orange and blue suits, as you guys can see. Right. One day, one of these guards, he happened to be kind of wasn't the nicest person. And unfortunately, when these Swiss guards would kind of mess up in some way or they would do something wrong, they would have to be they'd have to do like makeup work. It's almost like homework. Like you have to make it up, right? Because it's some weird form of punishment, but it's kind of just to get them on their toes and kind of keep them sharp. So they had a choice of what they could do. They can do, charity or whatever. And this man, he was like, all right, I messed up in this one thing, I'll just choose to do some charity. I'll clean some dishes. So he goes in, and he's in this big kitchen hall, and he just starts scrubbing, and he's washing things, and here, let me keep it there. And he's washing, and he's starting to complain, because he's kind of sweating a little bit, and he starts cursing under his breath. He's like, F this is horrible, I can't believe whatever, blah, blah, blah. You can imagine, right? And a little nun happens to walk up from behind him and taps him on the shoulder and hands him a towel. So he's complaining and takes the towel and he wipes his face. And he looks down and he sees that it's Mother Teresa that just handed him a towel. It's the same as we can say as if Baba Krolos walked up to him. Like that was the kind of figure she was. She was this huge figure in the Catholic Church. So he's speechless. So Mother Teresa looks at him, because remember she's short, so she's looking at him and she goes, "You're acting like a sissy," and just walks away. Says this grown I think he was about 6'9", man, and he felt very convicted by that. He experienced a metanoia, right, a change, simply by her laughter, her personality, her joy that she had. You're acting like a sissy. A month later, he's, on his post. Remember, they're standing there looking cute with their orange and blue. And who comes up? Little Mother Teresa. Happens to be in the area again a month later. She walks by him. She looks at him. She goes, and remember, he's standing macho man. His lats are showing. He's a big guy, right? He's like, now I'm going to show Mother Teresa who's a sissy, right? Like a big macho guy. Mother Teresa looks at him and goes, "You're still a sissy." And walks away. Right? This man today now is a very holy man. He's actually a very revered man, and he's been traveling the world kind of speaking about his experience and stuff. So, very holy man, just by that one experience with Mother Teresa. Okay. And then we'll end with this guy on this attribute, Elder Paisios. Who's heard of this guy? No one knows this guy? No one's heard of him? So he's a cool guy, very cool guy. Yes, the animal guy, exactly. Yeah, he's got the cool animal stuff. In fact, we'll talk about that today. He's also a funny guy. He's a monk. Okay, he's part of the Greek Orthodox Church. He passed away. He's a canonized saint in the Greek Orthodox Church. We happen to be very similar in our doctrine, but through politics and stuff that is above our pay grade, unfortunately, we're not in in communion. But however, God willing, keep praying for the union of our church, and hopefully we can come back to being one church. But our doctrine is the exact same. And basically, this man is, to give you a quick summary about him, he's a very playful man. He's smaller, on the smaller side. He's very, very quiet. He doesn't talk much. He listens often. He's slow and tender in the way he moves and functions and speaks. He happened to be a carpenter before his becoming a monk, and even throughout his monasticism, he would continuously build things for the church or build himself a home or stuff like that. Things for, the locals out. He would build things and, carve out icons. he was blessed with many gifts. And by gifts, I mean spiritual gifts. He could read many people's minds. He could see right through you, see the purity of your soul. He could prophesy, so he can tell you your future, whatever. You know, it sounds like Superman almost, right? Bunch of healings, miracles, everything you can think of. This man had almost every spiritual gift you guys can think of. And he happened to also be like a Baba Krolos figure, but in the Greek church. So people would travel all across the world just to see this man in a small little mountain island called Mount Athos off the Greek islands. So one time, there happened to be he was in school at the time as a youth. He was studying to be a doctor. And he was kind of traveling, and he heard about this Elder Paisios guy. He says, "Oh, have you heard about him? He's like, makes you experience the love of God. Every time you walk up to him, you feel like you're seeing, the love of God, right? And he'll like read your mind. He'll like do a miracle, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, ask him to pray for you. If you have problems, you need to ask him to pray for you." So he's like, "I'm not going to believe a thing until I see it." Right, and this was his attitude. He's like, "Oh, I'll see it. I need to see it for myself." Kind of like forgive me, St. Thomas, but kind of like a St. Thomas attitude. Kind of like, I need to see it first, right? And him and his friends happen to go to this mountain and to go kind of visit him. And they get to him, and he's sitting there, and everybody's super excited, right? And he's just like grumpy in the back. And Elder Paisios happens to walk up to him. And as he approaches him, he goes up to this man and he says, "I'm going to cut your head off and put it back on." Like, looks at him, he's like, "What?" He says, come here. I'm going to cut your head off. I'm going to put it back on again. You wanted to see a miracle, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, who is this man? Get this man far, far away from me. So Elder Paisios laughs. And this kind of shows the heart of this saint. He's very small, right? Like, you can imagine this small guy going up to this youth he's never met before. He read his thoughts. He heard, and this man will tell you, I literally was thinking, I need to see it before. He needs to do a miracle if I'm going to believe anything that comes out of this man's mouth. As if it was like clockwork, Elder Paisios comes up and he says that exact phrase. "Come here, I'm going to cut your head off and put it back on." And he's like, "Of course I'm not going to let you do that." No, you want to see a miracle, right? I'll show you. I'll cut your head off and put it back on." This is the kind of personality he invoked. This was different than Mother Teresa, different than Bonalua, but each of them had that laughter, that personality that was filled with this joy given by grace, by the joy of the resurrection that we're talking about today. Okay? Let's see here, are we good on time? Okay. All right. We could probably even end on this. How much time do we have, Abuna, till we... Sorry? Okay. And you guys feel good? Let me know when you guys are tired. Okay, because there's still part 2 to this next week, so we can finish it later. So, all right. Next attribute is joy nourishes our spirit's beauty and attractiveness. Joy nourishes our spirit's beauty and attractiveness. Okay, so the clergy that was in Abu Zeba, let's go back to the prison, all those clergy members weren't devilishly handsome men, right? They weren't like, very handsome men. Of course they're handsome men, but not in that state when they were very skinny and dying and sweaty and smelly. But there was a sweetness to them that didn't really make much sense. And remember how I was telling you guys, the prison guards knew they were different. These prison guards would see the worst criminals walk into their facility, and you can imagine how that would change you as a person if I had to kind of enforce the law on these men. You can imagine what words would be exchanged with these prison inmates, how they would treat them, how they would abuse them, how they would beat them, the psychological warfare that they would do on these prison inmates. So then they see these men, very pious, holy, gentle, kind, silent sufferers. The way they would put the cuffs on them, they'd be, put their arms up, go ahead. The way they would say, "Hey, please go in your cell." Obviously, they would never use the word please, right? They'd say, get your booty in the cell, right? And Hadr, right? They hand him the food, the gross, disgusting food. Alf shukran, thank you. 1,000 or 100 thank yous to you, as the phrase goes. So it was weird. Why are they doing that? Why are they so happy? This is not normal. These are weird people. In fact, some of these guards, as you can see them, this is what their attire was back in the 1980s. They happened to experience a metanoia, or a change, as we've been using the word today, themselves. The guards, they're not Christian. They are Muslim men or atheist. And we'll kind of give a little bit of their accounts today. So one of them happened to be by the name of Sobhi. He was a prison guard himself. And remember how I was telling you guys how the clergy was taken from one facility to the next facility? One of the facilities that they were being taken from over to before they were being transferred, and they had been there for about a month. One of the prison guards comes up to Abu Lu'a himself. Remember, let's see if I can find a picture here. The guy on the right. And he hugs him and he starts crying. It's a prison guard. Remember, we said, we can imagine prison guards are not criers. Right? That's to say the least. He comes up and he hugs him and he starts crying. So Bruno is kind of a little bit shocked, like, why is this guy crying on me? And the prison guard says, I can no longer be the same prison guard after meeting you men. I can no longer be the same man. Right? This reflects on their spiritual beauty, their attractiveness. Right? Sin is contagious, right? Unfortunately. But purity, love, joy, the fruits of the Spirit are more contagious, right? They're more influencing. They're more effective, right? We know this because Paul tells us love overcomes darkness, right? We can't defeat darkness with darkness. We defeat darkness with light. Perfect. Captain Magdi El-Tayyib, another prison guard. This was 2 months later after they had been finally released. It wasn't 2 months their duration, but the 2 months after they had been released that day. I forgot what the day was. And Abu Nudua happened to be, doing his thing, being a priest, serving as usual. He was at an airport at the time. He was picking up a family member or a family friend who was coming in the airport. And he was waiting for this I'm not sure if it was a youth or what. And as he was waiting, his brother was with him. So it was Abu Nudua and his brother. And they're waiting, hoping for the guy to hurry up because, airports are very speedy, as we know. And all of a sudden, Abu Nudua gets hugged from behind. So he feels like this hunch over. So Abu Nudua looks down. And his brother's looking at him. And Abu Nudua looks at him. And he goes, Captain Magdi. So they hug, and Abu Nudua turns around, they give him a big hug. I was like, I haven't seen you in so long. And they start talking as if it was like high school, that they came from or something, right? And his brother asks Abu Nudua, he's like, Abu Nudua, who is this? He says, oh, this is the prison guard, one of the prison guards from when I was in the prison. What? The Sahaba, you guys are friends? I don't understand. There's no way. Right? Abu Nudua talks about how this captain initially was kind of rough with them, and over the course of time it became softer and softer and kinder and kinder and kinder, and just, I guess you can say in a way, fell in love with the priests, fell in love with the holiness that they possessed, fell in love with Christ, whether they knew it was Christ or not, right? Okay. And let's see here. We can probably end on joy nourishes hope. We'll just end on this last thing. And we'll leave the rest for next time. So joy nourishes hope. Joy nourishes hope. Joy nourishes hope. Okay. So these three people, we've talked about two of them. Do you guys know who's on the left? The Maverini, right? So joy nourishes hope to the point or it can even push a person and have an effect on their suffering to where they desire suffering. This is a unique quality. So suffering is not like a thing to be desired. But these three saints happen to be very outspoken about their desire for suffering. Actually, I want to look a little bit more hidden. But they desired this, almost to the point where people thought they were crazy or just weird. Right? Why would Tamaverini say, oh, you know what, like, God, I'm going to pray every day for suffering. Abuna Bishoy Kamel would never out loud pray to change the cancer that he got at the end of his life. Would never pray against it. Later we'll find out Abuna Tadros wrote a book about him and said he prayed for it actually, right? Abuna Lua himself, hosting this joy, happened to, I guess we can say, so happened to be a person I know, a friend of mine, who happened to know a mystic that's over in Egypt. Mystics are like some of the holy people that see saints and stuff, but then experience heavy spiritual warfare. But it's kind of a gift that God gives to the church to kind of see his face in a miraculous way. So this friend happened to know this mystic. And this mystic happens obviously to know Abuna Loa, because Abuna Loa was a big name. And this person asked my friend, said, and I'm not going to give the mystic's name just to conserve that person, but says, oh, please, can you pray for Abuna? The friend asks the mystic, can you pray for Abuna Loa? He's dying from cancer. He's dying. Please pray for him. Like, how is God going to tell you no, right? You're so close to him. So the mystic responds to the friend and says, and this mystic never denied praying for anyone, but looked at my friend and said, absolutely not. I can't do that. Why won't you do that? Why won't you pray for him? He's our priest. He loves us. He's a good man. He shouldn't die the way he's dying. Why? Why won't you pray for him, for the cancer to go away? Habibti, this is because he asked for this. Abuna never told the soul this, but he asked for this. So I hope today, at least for the rest of the week, I'm going to bother you guys again next week. We can meditate on these few things. This joy nourishes hope. Our spirit's beauty and attractiveness nourishes laughter, personality, steadfastness and faith and the fearlessness in the world. Hopefully we can take this into our week. And please keep me in your prayers. Glory be to God.
Anybody questions? Comments? Okay, well, you know how this goes. If you come here, you gotta do a takeaway. So we're gonna do takeaways then, because I ain't doing this, all right? Yeah, I ain't gonna hustle me. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Was there like a reason why they were taken to prison? I'm just like interested in like
why they were taken to prison. So like you want like reasons why they took them in, basically. Got you. Yeah. So the honest truth, they didn't have a reason at all. But what they would accuse them of is like conspiring against the government. You guys are like have all this money and like give it to the poor, and you guys like do this weird prayers in the middle of the night, and you guys make calls in the middle of the night to each other. Go to jail. Right? Right? Like, it was really stupid stuff that they like accused them of, and we'll talk about next week some of the stuff they accused them of and how God kind of preserved them from all the accusations and the questioning. Hopefully that kind of answers that. show the hands. You gotta.
I'm not owning that. It didn't happen. I didn't do it. All the fruits of the Spirit. You don't have to repeat these back.
She said all the fruits of the Spirit are connected to each other. Very good. Awesome. I'm assuming this is for the live stream. Hi, everybody.
I'm thinking. I guess, like, for these three, like, you get to a certain point where, I mean, they're so close to God that it was, like, the suffering that brought them closer to God, not their, like, good circumstances. So, I mean, that's really powerful.
Yeah. Have you heard of a trauma bond?
Yeah.
Yeah. It exists.
But it's like a good trauma bond.
Literally, yeah. It's exactly.
I guess no matter what you go through in life, if you stay close to God, you'll always have that joy regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah. I love that.
I love this, actually. I wanted to say one of the things I really enjoyed was when you were telling the story about how they were dealing with it in the prison. I think one of the things we forget, suffering will always be there. But when we suffer consistently, we're numbed to suffering. Specifically when what happens? When we have God with us and when we carry joy in Him, then our suffering, even if it's there, it becomes numb. So when you hear the story about Abu Nalu'a and his time in that prison, it's amazing. And why would they never trade it? Because yes, there's the initial shock of your life changing. Just like when we make a major change in our lives to walk away from sin. And it's uncomfortable, and it's suffering, and it's hard. But the suffering becomes numbed by the joy of the presence of God actively working in us. Which is why I just love that you told that story, because it's one of my absolute favorites. So I love that. So thank you. All right, we're going to pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We thank you, Lord, for this day. We thank you for the blessing of our fellowship. Lord, we ask that you please give each one of us the courage to choose joy every day, to understand that when we put joy first in our lives, that it accentuates your beauty in us. It gives us a courage and a fearlessness to deal with the challenges of our lives. It grounds us in our faith because we realize bit by bit that there's a purpose for all we endure. And most importantly, it gives us hope to keep going because we know that you will end the pain and you will always give us something better. I ask you, Lord, to please bless our speaker and continue to guide him, guard him, and keep him all the days of his life. Watch over everyone here tonight, Lord, and help each one of us to pursue joy actively in our lives because the joy of the resurrection is active in us. Lord, I ask you to watch over our father, Abu Nabulis, help him to shepherd the flock in peace according to your word. We thank you for everything concerning everything and everything, amen, through the intercessions of the Mother of God, the Theotokos St. Mary, our patron saints St. Monica and St. Augustine and St. Paul, and the power of the resurrection. Hear us as we pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever and ever. Amen. Love of God the Father, the grace of the only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, the gift and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. You may go in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all. We're going to have Abram back next week, so we'll take another blessing from him as we continue our journey through the joy, the relentless joy of the resurrection. And then we'll have a couple of blessings from some priests for a couple of weeks, and then you guys got stuck with me again. So we'll have a good Chamasin, okay?